The air left Maya's lungs in a single, brutal instant. One moment, she stood at the top of the staircase, her hand still gripping the doorknob of the bedroom she'd shared with Daniel for 3 years. The next, his palm connected with her shoulder, not a shove, but a launch. Her feet left the carpet. Time stretched and contracted simultaneously as her body twisted in freefall, the wooden banister a blur, her sister's scream cutting through the air like shattered glass. The back of her head struck the 5th step with a crack that echoed through the Victorian townhouse. Then the 6th step caught her spine. The 7th, her hip. At the landing, she finally stopped, her left leg bent at an angle, legs shouldn't bend, her vision filled with dancing stars and the crystal chandelier above swaying gently, indifferently. Through the ringing in her ears, she heard his voice, Daniel's voice, the same one that had whispered, "I love you," that very morning. Now cold and mechanical, "You shouldn't have come home early." Maya Catherine Okonkwo was born on March 15, 1992, in Lagos, Nigeria, before her family immigrated to Manchester, England when she was 7. At 32, she'd built a life that looked perfect from the outside, a thriving career as a senior architect at Morrison & Webb, a converted townhouse in Didsbury that she'd renovated herself, and a relationship with Daniel Cross that everyone called couple goals. But perfection was a facade Maya had learned to maintain since childhood. Growing up as the eldest daughter of Nigerian immigrants, she'd absorbed the weight of expectation like a sponge absorbs water, silently, completely, until she could hold no more. Her father, Dr. Emmanuel Okonkwo, a cardiovascular surgeon, had impressed upon her the importance of excellence, composure, and duty. Her mother, Grace, a former teacher turned homemaker, had taught her that a woman's value lay in her ability to hold things together, to smooth over rough edges, to make everyone else comfortable even when she was drowning. Maya's core wound was invisibility. Despite her achievements, she'd spent her life feeling unseen, not for who she truly was, but as a collection of roles she performed, the dutiful daughter, the successful professional, the supportive girlfriend, the protective older sister. Daniel Arthur Cross, born November 8, 1989, in Liverpool, presented himself as Maya's perfect complement. At 35, he worked as a financial consultant, drove a Tesla, wore tailored suits, and possessed the kind of easy charm that made strangers trust him immediately. He'd pursued Maya relentlessly 2 years ago at a mutual friend's wedding, sending flowers to her office, learning about Nigerian cuisine to impress her mother, and listening, or seeming to listen. When Maya talked about the pressure she felt to represent her family well. But beneath Daniel's polished exterior lived a man consumed by entitlement and narcissistic rage. Born to working-class parents who divorced bitterly when he was 12, Daniel had constructed his entire identity around proving he was better than his origins. Every relationship, every acquisition, every success was a trophy to display. He didn't love Maya, he loved what having her said about him. That he could win a beautiful, successful, accomplished woman. Then there was Chioma, Maya's younger sister by 4 years, born July 22, 1996. Where Maya was controlled and composed, Chioma was impulsive and magnetic. She'd moved to Manchester 6 months ago after dropping out of university in London, claiming she needed a fresh start. Maya had welcomed her, set up the guest room, helped her find work as a social media coordinator for a local boutique. What Maya didn't know was that Chioma had always resented living in her sister's shadow, had always wondered what it would feel like to take something Maya treasured. The setting was Maya's pride, a 3-story Victorian townhouse on Burton Road she'd purchased as a foreclosure and spent 2 years renovating. Every room reflected her aesthetic, clean lines, warm woods, careful curation. But lately, the house has begun to feel different. Colder. The spaces between words at dinner growing wider. Daniel's phone face down on every surface. Chioma's lingering glances that Maya told herself she was imagining. The date was October 14, 2024, a gray Tuesday that would cleave Maya's life into before and after. To understand how Maya arrived at the bottom of her own staircase, you must first understand the architecture of her life, the careful construction, and the hidden fault lines. The Okonkwo family's immigration to Manchester in 1999 had been equal parts opportunity and exile. Emmanuel had been offered a prestigious position at Manchester Royal Infirmary, but the move also distanced them from extended family in Lagos after a bitter inheritance dispute following Maya's grandfather's death. In Nigeria, they had status, history, and belonging. In England, they had to rebuild everything from nothing. Maya remembered those early years with painful clarity. Her father working brutal hours, her mother's homesickness manifesting as an obsessive focus on maintaining Nigerian traditions and values, the way white classmates had mispronounced her name until she'd stopped correcting them. She'd learned to code switch seamlessly, Igbo at home, British English at school, always performing, always translating between worlds. Chioma, born in England, had never known that displacement. She'd grown up British in a way Maya never could, resenting the traditional expectations their parents placed on them while enjoying the financial security Emmanuel's career provided. The sisters had been close as children, but adolescence had driven a wedge between them. Maya, the achiever, won praise. Chioma, the free spirit, won lectures. Their relationship had been complicated by a pivotal event when Maya was 19 and Chioma 15. Their cousin Namdi had visited from Lagos and sexually assaulted Chioma at a family gathering. When Chioma confessed to Maya, begging her to say something, Maya was frozen, paralyzed by fear of disrupting family harmony, of causing shame, of not being believed. She'd convinced Chioma to stay quiet, promising they'd handle it together later. They never did. Namdi returned to Nigeria. The wound festered. Chioma had forgiven Maya, or claimed to. But the betrayal had poisoned the well of their sisterhood. Chioma learned that Maya's protection was conditional, that family loyalty trumped individual truth, that sometimes the people who should defend you will choose comfort instead. Daniel had entered Maya's life at a vulnerable moment. At 30, she'd just made senior architect, but a previous relationship had ended painfully when her ex-fiancé, James, had admitted he'd only proposed because it seemed like the right time, not because he actually wanted to marry her. The rejection had confirmed Maya's deepest fear, that she was fundamentally forgettable, easily replaced. Daniel had seemed like the antidote. He'd pursued her with intensity, made her feel chosen, special, seen. He'd learned her favorite flowers, peonies. Remembered details about her projects, charmed her parents. For someone accustomed to earning affection through achievement, being desired simply for existing felt revolutionary. What Maya didn't see was the calculation behind Daniel's courtship. He'd recently lost a major client and needed to rebuild his image. Maya, beautiful, successful, with an intact family and cultural depth, made him look substantial. Her Nigerian heritage gave him multicultural credibility in professional settings. Her achievements reflected well on his taste. Their relationship followed a predictable pattern, idealization, where Daniel placed Maya on a pedestal, devaluation, where he began pointing out her flaws, and intermittent reinforcement, where he'd alternate between criticism and grand romantic gestures, creating an addictive cycle that kept Maya off balance. The proposal had come during a weekend in the Cotswolds, a calculated performance complete with a photographer Daniel had hired to capture her surprise. Maya had said yes because saying no would have required acknowledging that something felt wrong, and acknowledging that would have meant confronting her choices, disappointing her family, proving she'd failed again. They'd lived together for 18 months before Chioma arrived. The first 6 months had been good. Or Maya had convinced herself they were. Daniel had been attentive, ambitious, present. But gradually, he'd begun staying late at the office, becoming irritable when Maya asked about his day, criticizing her cooking, her friends, the way she dressed. Classic narcissistic devaluation, though Maya didn't have the language for it then. When Chioma asked to stay temporarily, Maya had welcomed the buffer. Perhaps having someone else in the house would ease the growing tension, would remind Daniel of the loving person he used to be. She'd ignored the voice that whispered warnings when she saw Daniel's eyes follow Chioma across a room, when conversations between them fell silent as Maya entered. The affair had begun 3 months ago, in August. It had started, as these things do, with boundary violations disguised as connection. Chioma complaining about a bad date, Daniel offering advice. Late-night conversations in the kitchen when Maya was working late. Accidental touches that lingered too long. Shared jokes that excluded Maya. Then, on an evening when Maya worked overnight to meet a deadline, it had happened. Chioma, drunk and reckless, had kissed him. Daniel, who'd been fantasizing about it for weeks, had kissed back. They'd had sex in the guest room, Chioma's room, 20 feet from where Maya slept when she finally came home at dawn. The affair had continued with increasing boldness, afternoon encounters when Maya was at the office, hurried moments in the bathroom during dinner parties, texts that buzzed through family gatherings. The thrill, for both of them, wasn't just physical. It was the transgression itself, the secret they shared, the power they held over Maya without her knowledge. The unraveling began in small ways Maya tried desperately to ignore. 3 weeks before October 14th, she'd come home to find Chioma wearing her silk robe, the cream one Daniel had bought her for her birthday. "I spilled coffee on mine," Chioma had explained, but something about the casual intimacy of seeing her sister in her robe, fresh from a shower, Daniel looking up from his laptop with a carefully neutral expression, had sent ice through Maya's veins. The next week, Maya had noticed a shift in the house's energy. Rooms fell silent when she entered. Conversations redirected mid-sentence. Chioma had started mentioning things about Daniel Maya hadn't told her, his preference for black coffee in the afternoon, his allergy to cats, his college rugby injury. Small details that suggested a level of attention Maya told herself came from Chioma living with them, nothing more. Daniel had become simultaneously distant and possessive. He'd stopped initiating sex but became angry when Maya worked late, accusing her of choosing her career over him. He'd criticize her appearance. "Are you wearing that to dinner with clients?" Then compliment Chioma's outfit with an enthusiasm that felt like a comparison. When Maya tried to address the growing coldness between them, he'd gaslight her seamlessly. "You're being paranoid. You're stressed from work. Maybe you should talk to someone about your anxiety." Chioma had started borrowing Maya's clothes, her jewelry, even her perfume. "We're the same size," she'd say, as if that justified the violation. But it was more than sharing, it was erasure, replacement. Chioma was trying on Maya's life like a costume, seeing if it fit. The symbolic imagery accumulated. Maya would find 2 wine glasses in the sink when she'd only drunk water. A lipstick shade she didn't own left uncapped in the bathroom. The guest room bed was unmade in ways that suggested activity beyond sleeping. Her mother's necklace, a family heirloom Maya kept in her jewelry box, appeared around Chioma's neck at Sunday dinner. Maya's body had begun keeping score even as her mind rationalized. She'd lost weight, her sleep fragmented by nameless anxiety. She'd wake at 3 a.m. with her heart racing, checking her phone for messages that never came, listening to sounds in the house she couldn't identify. Her work had suffered. She'd missed deadlines for the first time in her career, her attention fragmenting whenever she tried to concentrate. Her friends had noticed. Her best friend Aisha had asked point-blank over lunch, "Are you okay? You seem absent." Maya had smiled and lied, just stressed about the Riverside project. But Aisha's concern lingered in her eyes, the look of someone watching a friend make choices they don't understand, unable to intervene. 2 days before October 14th, Maya had found a receipt in Daniel's car for dinner at Hawksmoor, an expensive steakhouse they'd talked about trying but never had. The date was the previous week, a Thursday when Daniel had claimed to be working late. The receipt showed 2 meals, a bottle of expensive wine, and dessert. When she'd asked about it, casually, he'd snapped, "I had a client dinner. Why are you interrogating me?" The night before, Sunday the 13th, they'd all had dinner together. Maya, Daniel, and Chioma. Maya had cooked her mother's jollof rice recipe, trying to recreate some sense of family warmth. Daniel and Chioma had laughed at inside jokes Maya didn't understand, their knees touching under the table in a way Maya saw but couldn't quite process. When Maya had excused herself to take a work call, she'd returned to find them in the kitchen, standing too close, Chioma's hand on Daniel's arm, both jumping apart when they heard Maya's footsteps. That night, lying beside Daniel in bed, Maya had felt the weight of what she knew but couldn't admit. His body angled away from her, his breathing too controlled to be actual sleep. She'd reached for him, needing to confirm the connection, and he'd shrugged her off. "I'm tired, Maya." She'd lain awake until dawn, staring at the ceiling, her mind cataloging evidence she refused to assemble into truth. October 14th dawned gray and cold, autumn asserting itself with rain that drummed against the windows like fingers tapping for entry. Maya had a site visit scheduled at the Riverside development, her firm's flagship project, a mixed-use complex that would define her career. She'd left early, kissing Daniel's shoulder as he slept, leaving a note for Chioma about dinner plans. Normal. Everything is normal. The site visit had been cut short when the client rescheduled due to flooding concerns. By 11 a.m., Maya was driving back through rain-slicked streets, mentally rearranging her day. She'd use the unexpected free time to work from home, maybe surprise Daniel with lunch, and reconnect with him the way they used to. She'd pulled into the driveway at 11:47 a.m., noting Daniel's Tesla still parked where it had been that morning. He must be working from home too. Good. Maybe they could actually talk, address the distance that had calcified between them. The house was quiet when she entered through the front door, unusually so. Usually, if Daniel was home, she'd hear music or the television, his voice on a call. Today, silence. She'd removed her wet coat, hung it on the hook, slipped off her shoes, all normal rhythms of returning home. Then she'd heard it, a sound from upstairs. A moan. A laugh. Something that made her pause with her hand on the banister, her brain struggling to contextualize what her ears reported. She'd climbed the stairs slowly, each step careful, quiet, her heart beginning to pound with a dread she couldn't name. The sound was coming from the bedroom, her bedroom, the room she shared with Daniel. But it wasn't Daniel's voice. There were multiple voices. Movement. The creak of bed springs she knew intimately because she'd chosen that bed, that mattress, had slept on it 1,000 nights. Her hand had reached for the doorknob, and some part of her had known. Some part of her had been waiting for this confirmation since she'd found that receipt, since she'd seen them standing too close in the kitchen, since the first time Daniel's eyes had followed Chioma with an interest that felt wrong. She'd turned the knob. Pushed the door open. The scene had assembled itself in fragments, her bed, the white duvet she'd washed 2 days ago now rumpled and stained. Daniel, naked, frozen in the act of pulling away. And Chioma. Her baby sister, who she'd protected and housed and loved, sitting up with her hands clutching the sheet, her eyes wide not with guilt but with something worse, triumph. Time had fractured. Maya had stood in the doorway, unable to process the violation, the betrayal layered upon betrayal. This wasn't just adultery. This was sisterhood murdered. This was obliterated by every boundary. This was her bed, her home, her life being used as the stage for her humiliation. Maya. Daniel had started, his voice carrying a tone she'd never heard, panic mixed with irritation, as if she'd interrupted something, as if she were the intruder. "I can explain," Chioma had said, which was almost funny because what explanation could possibly exist? What words could reassemble reality after this? Maya had made a sound, not a scream, not a word, just a sound of pure anguish that came from somewhere primal. She'd backed away from the doorway, her hands clutching her chest, unable to breathe, unable to think beyond the image now seared into her brain. Daniel had grabbed his boxers, followed her out onto the landing. "Maya, wait. Just wait." She'd turned to face him, to demand answers, to ask the 1,000 questions flooding her mind. How long? Why? In our bed? With my sister. And then Daniel had changed. The panic in his eyes had hardened into something cold, something she'd never seen but would never forget. His jaw had clenched. His hand had formed a fist. "You shouldn't have come home early," he'd said, his voice mechanical, emotionless. And then he pushed her. Maya woke in the hospital 43 hours later. The first thing she registered was pain, a constellation of it spreading from her head, her back, her leg. The second was the beeping of monitors, mechanical and insistent. The third was her mother's voice, broken by tears, "She's awake. Grace, she's awake." The neurosurgeon, Dr. Patel, explained the damage with clinical precision: severe concussion, 3 fractured vertebrae, shattered left femur requiring surgical repair with pins and rods, extensive bruising, minor internal bleeding. She'd been unconscious for nearly 2 days. They'd kept her sedated to manage brain swelling. She was lucky to be alive. Lucky to have any chance of walking again. But Maya didn't feel lucky. She felt hollowed out, a shell of a person haunted by the image of Daniel's hand extending toward her shoulder, Chioma's scream cutting through the air, the sickening sequence of impacts as her body had collided with stairs she'd refinished herself. Her father sat rigid in the corner, his surgeon's composure barely masking murderous rage. Her mother held her hand, whispering prayers in Igbo. And Chioma. Chioma stood near the window, her face puffy from crying, unable to meet Maya's eyes. "Where is he?" Maya's voice came out hoarse, damaged. Her father's jaw tightened. "In custody. The police arrested him that day." The story emerged in pieces, assembled from her parents' careful explanations and, later, from Detective Constable Sarah Morrison's patient questioning. After Maya had fallen, Chioma had called 999, hysterical. Paramedics had arrived to find Maya unconscious at the bottom of the stairs, Daniel pacing near her body claiming it was an accident, Chioma wrapped in a sheet screaming that it wasn't, that he'd pushed her, that she'd seen it. Daniel had been arrested at the scene. He'd initially claimed Maya had lost her balance, but Chioma's witness statement, and the trajectory of Maya's injuries, contradicted him. The angle of impact, the force required, the position of Maya's body all indicated she'd been pushed, not fallen. But the physical evidence was only part of the investigation. D.C. Morrison had seized Daniel's phone, laptop, and financial records. What they'd found had unveiled an entirely different man than the one Maya thought she knew. Daniel Arthur Cross had a history. 3 years before meeting Maya, he'd been cautioned for assault against a previous girlfriend in Liverpool, an incident he'd never disclosed. The woman had declined to press charges after Daniel's lawyer had offered her money, but the police report detailed a pattern: controlling behavior, emotional abuse, explosive rage when challenged. His financial records revealed systematic deception. The successful financial consultant persona was largely fiction. Daniel's firm had let him go 8 months ago due to client complaints and ethical violations. He'd been living off credit cards and Maya's income. She'd been covering most household expenses without realizing it, Daniel's contributions dwindling as his debts mounted. But the most devastating discovery came from his phone. Messages to friends mocking Maya: "She's so desperate to be loved, she doesn't even notice I'm checked out." Photos of Chioma sent to his friends with crude captions. Group chats where he discussed his plan to propose to Maya primarily for financial stability while keeping his options open. And then there were the messages with Chioma. Hundreds of them, going back 4 months. Explicit photos. Detailed plans for encounters. But worse than the sexual content were the conversations about Maya, the mocking, the contempt, the way they'd bonded over their shared deception. In one particularly cruel exchange from September. Daniel. * She's working late again. Thinks she's so important, *. Chioma ****** everything's always about her career. So self-centered, *. Daniel ***** want to fuck in her bed? Chioma ***** God yes. She doesn't deserve you, asterisk. Reading the messages later, when D.C. Morrison showed them to her as part of the evidence, Maya had felt something inside her calcify. These were the two people she'd trusted most outside her parents. One she'd planned to marry. One she'd protected since childhood. And they'd turned her love into a weapon against her. The investigation also revealed Chioma's motivations weren't just about attraction to Daniel. Financial records showed Chioma had significant gambling debts, over £15,000 accumulated through online betting. She'd been hoping Daniel would help her, perhaps even that he'd leave Maya for her and his imagined wealth would solve her problems. Neither had realized the other was essentially broke, both performing prosperity while drowning in debt. But perhaps the most painful discovery came from Maya's own memories, recovered in therapy sessions once she was stable enough to process trauma. She began remembering small moments she'd dismissed or rationalized. Daniel's hand gripping her arm too tightly during arguments, leaving bruises she'd attributed to her own clumsiness. His escalating verbal abuse disguised as jokes, calling her uptight, frigid, boring, in front of friends. The time he'd thrown his phone across the room during an argument, narrowly missing her head, then apologized so profusely she'd convinced herself it was an accident. The pattern had been there all along. She'd just been conditioned since childhood to smooth over rough edges, to excuse bad behavior, to prioritize others' comfort over her own safety. Maya's transformation didn't come like lightning, sudden and illuminating. It came like stone being carved, slow, painful, permanent. The first 6 weeks after the incident, she was focused on survival. 3 surgeries to repair her shattered femur. Excruciating physical therapy to relearn walking. Medication for pain, for sleep, for the depression that descended like fog. Her parents had moved her into their home, converted their dining room into a temporary bedroom because she couldn't manage stairs. But between the surgeries and therapy sessions, something was shifting in Maya's internal architecture. She'd spent 32 years building her identity on being valuable to others. She'd measured her worth by her ability to maintain relationships, keep peace, meet expectations. And where had it gotten her? Broken at the bottom of her own stairs. Her therapist, Dr. Okonkwo, a British-Nigerian woman her parents had found who specialized in trauma and cultural identity, had introduced her to Stoic philosophy during their 4th session. You cannot control what Daniel did, Dr. Okonkwo had explained. You cannot control Chioma's choices. You can only control how you respond to what happened, and who you become after it. Maya had initially resisted. Acceptance felt like excusing them, like diminishing the magnitude of their betrayal. But slowly, she began to understand, acceptance wasn't approval. It was acknowledging reality so she could move forward instead of staying trapped in the loop of why and how could they. She'd started reading Marcus Aurelius's Meditations, finding unexpected resonance in ancient wisdom. You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. The transformation accelerated during the 8th week, when Maya was finally strong enough to attend Daniel's bail hearing. She'd insisted on going despite her parents' protests, wheeling herself into the courtroom in the wheelchair that had become her temporary reality. Daniel had looked smaller than she remembered, or perhaps she'd just stopped seeing him through the lens of who she'd needed him to be. His expensive suit couldn't hide the defeat in his shoulders, the calculated remorse in his expression as his lawyer argued for bail. When the prosecutor detailed the evidence, the assault history, the financial deception, the witness testimony, the trajectory analysis proving he'd pushed her, Maya had felt something unexpected, not rage or heartbreak, but clarity. This man had never loved her. He'd used her. And she'd allowed it because she'd been so desperate to be chosen that she'd ignored every warning sign. But she was choosing now. Choosing to testify. Choosing to demand justice. Choosing herself. The judge denied bail. As Daniel was led away, he'd looked at Maya, and she'd met his eyes without flinching. No tears. No anger. Just the cold, clear gaze of someone who sees truth and refuses to look away. After the hearing, in the car with her parents, Maya had made a decision: she would not be defined by what was done to her. She would be defined by how she rebuilt. The physical healing was measurable: weight she could bear on her leg, stairs she could manage, pain medication she could reduce. But the psychological healing required different work. Maya had to grieve multiple losses simultaneously. The relationship she'd thought she had, the sister she believed Chioma to be, the version of herself who'd accepted crumbs and called it love. She had to confront the ways she'd betrayed herself long before Daniel pushed her, every time she'd ignored her intuition, dismissed her own needs, prioritized others' comfort. She also had to reckon with her childhood wound, the invisibility. She'd spent so long performing versions of herself designed to be acceptable, valuable, necessary. Who was she when she stopped performing? What did she want when she stopped curating her desires to match others' expectations? The answers emerged slowly. She wanted space, physical and emotional. She wanted work that fulfilled her, not just impressed others. She wanted relationships built on mutual respect, not performance and placation. She wanted to be alone and actually like her own company. She'd started journaling, processing the trauma through writing. One entry from week 10 read: I think I've been afraid of my own anger my whole life. Afraid that if I acknowledged how much certain things hurt me, I'd be too much, too difficult, too angry to love. So I swallowed it. Smiled through it. And it poisoned me from the inside. I'm done swallowing poison to make other people comfortable. Asterisk. By month 4, Maya was walking with a cane. She'd returned to work part-time, finding unexpected strength in the routines of architecture. The precision, the planning, the careful construction of something from nothing. Her colleagues had been supportive, giving her space when she needed it, welcome when she was ready. She'd also made a decision about Chioma. Chioma had been begging to see Maya since the incident. Texts, voice messages, letters left with their parents. All saying variations of the same thing: asterisk, I'm sorry. I know I destroyed everything. Please let me explain. I love you. I need my sister, asterisk. Maya had ignored them all for 4 months. But in therapy, Dr. Okafor had suggested that confrontation might be necessary for Maya's healing, not to forgive or reconcile, but to speak her truth directly to the person who'd helped shatter her life. You need to say what you never got to say, Dr. Okafor explained. Not for her benefit. For yours. So these words stop circling in your mind looking for an exit. Maya had agreed to one meeting, on her terms, in a neutral location. She'd chosen a private room at a cafe near her therapist's office, public enough to feel safe, private enough to speak honestly. The week before the meeting, Maya's anxiety had spiked. She'd have nightmares of standing at the top of the stairs again, of Chioma's face wearing that expression of triumph. She'd wake with her heart racing, her therapist's words echoing, asterisk, you survived. You're safe. You choose what happens next, asterisk. She'd prepared for the confrontation like she prepared for major client presentations, outlining what she needed to say, anticipating reactions, grounding herself in her purpose. This wasn't about getting Chioma to understand or apologize satisfactorily. This was about Maya reclaiming her voice. Her mother had begged her to reconsider. She's your sister. Your only sister. Family is forever. But Maya had stood firm. She stopped being my sister when she got into my bed. Some betrayals you don't come back from. The day of the meeting, February 3, 2025, nearly 4 months after the incident, Maya dressed carefully. Not for Chioma, but for herself. A navy dress that made her feel professional and composed. Minimal jewelry. Her mother's necklace, reclaimed from Chioma's belongings and now returned to Maya's jewelry box. She arrived 15 minutes early, positioning herself at the table so she faced the door, back to the wall. A tactical choice. She wanted to see Chioma arrive, wanted control over the space. When Chioma entered at exactly 2 p.m., Maya was struck by how diminished she looked. Her sister had lost weight, her eyes hollow with dark circles beneath. She wore a simple sweater and jeans, her usually styled hair pulled back simply. No makeup. Raw and exposed. They'd looked at each other across the small table, 4 months of silence stretching between them like a chasm. "Thank you for seeing me," Chioma had started, her voice small. Maya had nodded, her hands folded on the table, her spine straight despite the residual pain. "I'm not here to give you closure. I'm here because I have things I need to say, and you're going to listen." Chioma's face had crumpled, but she'd nodded, accepting the terms. Maya had taken a breath, grounding herself in the hard-won clarity of 4 months of therapy, pain, and transformation. "I've spent 4 months trying to understand how you could do this," Maya began, her voice steady despite the emotion threatening to crack it. "How my baby sister, the girl I walked to school, who I helped with homework, who I let move into my home when she needed help, could fuck my fiancé in my bed and then watch him push me down the stairs." Chioma flinched at the bluntness, tears already streaming down her face. "Maya, I'm not finished." Maya's tone was ice. "You don't get to interrupt. You don't get to explain. You had 4 months to prepare what you wanted to say. This is my time." Chioma closed her mouth, nodding. "I've read the messages between you and Daniel. All of them. The police showed me everything during the investigation. So I know this wasn't just attraction or a drunken mistake. This was calculated. You mocked me. You used my bed deliberately because it made the betrayal more thrilling. You bonded with him over your shared contempt for me. That wasn't." "I didn't," Chioma's voice broke. "You called me self-centered for working hard. You laughed when he called me frigid. You planned your encounters around my schedule like I was an obstacle to work around, not a person you supposedly loved." Maya's hands trembled slightly, but her voice remained controlled. "And the whole time, I was paying your phone bill. I was covering your portion of groceries because I knew you were struggling financially. I was your sister. I know." Chioma's voice rose in anguish. "I know what I did. I know it's unforgivable. I've hated myself every single day since." "I don't care about your self-hatred," Maya cut her off, her words surgical. "Your guilt is not my responsibility to manage. I spent my whole life managing everyone else's emotions, and looking where it got me." Chioma was sobbing now, but Maya felt nothing except the necessity of speaking these truths aloud. "Do you know what the worst part is?" Maya continued. "It's not even an affair. It's that when I was lying at the bottom of those stairs, possibly dying, your first thought was to scream and call for help. Not because you cared about me, but because you were terrified of the consequences you'd face. The police told me you kept saying, 'I didn't know he'd do that. I didn't know.' As if your ignorance of his violence absolved you of your role in creating the situation. I never wanted you hurt. You wanted me erased." Maya's voice finally broke, emotion flooding through the careful control. "You wanted my life. My home. My relationship. You wanted to be me because you've spent your whole life resenting being you. And when you couldn't become me, you settled for destroying me instead." The words hung in the air, brutal and true. Chioma was shaking, her hands covering her face. "I'm so sorry. Maya, I'm so sorry. I love you. You're my sister. I never meant love." Maya's laugh was bitter. "You don't know what that word means. Love doesn't mock. Love doesn't betray. Love doesn't stand by while someone you supposedly care about is pushed down a staircase and say, 'I didn't know he'd do that,' like you played no part in the violence. What do you want me to say?" Chioma's voice was ragged with desperation. "Nothing." Maya's response was final. "I don't want anything from you. That's why I'm here, to tell you that I don't need your apology. I don't need you to understand the depth of what you've done. I don't need reconciliation or forgiveness or family reunions where we pretend this didn't happen. But we're sisters. Biology isn't sacred, Maya said, her voice quiet but absolute. You taught me that. The fact that we share DNA doesn't obligate me to keep you in my life after you've shown me exactly who you are. Chioma looked like she'd been struck. So that's it? You're just cutting me out forever. I'm choosing myself for the first time in my life, Maya corrected. I'm choosing to surround myself with people who value me, who respect me, who wouldn't participate in my humiliation for the thrill of it. You're not one of those people. People make mistakes. Sleeping with Daniel wasn't a mistake, Maya interrupted. Sleeping with him the first time might have been. Sleeping with him in my bed, repeatedly, for months, while living in my home and accepting my help, that was a choice. Multiple choices. Hundreds of choices, every time you looked me in the eye and lied about where you'd been, what you'd been doing, who you'd become. The truth of it settled between them like ash after fire. Chioma tried one more time, her voice small, I don't know who I am without you. You've always been there. Then you'll figure it out, Maya said, standing with effort, reaching for her cane. Like I'm figuring out who I am without the sister I thought I had. The difference is, I'm not asking you to help me rebuild. I'm doing it alone, with people who actually deserve to be in my life. Mom and Dad are heartbroken, yes. But they understand why I'm making this choice, even if it hurts them. Because they're actually capable of putting my well-being first, something you never learned to do. Maya moved toward the door, each step still requiring conscious effort, her leg reminding her of what Chioma's choices had cost. Maya, wait. Chioma stood, reaching out. Maya turned back, her expression not angry now, just tired. I hope you get help, Chioma. I hope you figure out why you needed to destroy the person who loved you most. I hope you address your gambling addiction and your self-hatred and whatever else drove you to make the choices you made. But I won't be there to watch. I won't be there to forgive you when you're ready. I'm done sacrificing myself on the altar of other people's dysfunction. I'll regret this forever, Chioma whispered. Good, Maya said simply. Live with it. Learn from it. Become someone different. But do it without me. And then she walked out, leaving Chioma crying in the cafe, leaving behind the role of protective older sister she performed for 28 years, leaving behind the last piece of who she used to be. The trial of Daniel Arthur Cross began on March 15, 2025, Maya's 33rd birthday. She testified for 4 hours, recounting the relationship, the abuse she'd minimized, the final confrontation. The defense attorney tried to suggest she'd been unstable, that perhaps she'd stumbled, that the relationship was mutually toxic. But the evidence was overwhelming. Witness testimony from Chioma, forensic analysis of the fall trajectory, Daniel's history of violence, the messages demonstrating premeditation of the affair. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. Guilty of grievous bodily harm with intent. Guilty of assault occasioning actual bodily harm. The judge sentenced him to 7 years in prison. Maya felt nothing watching him being led away. No satisfaction, no closure. Just the quiet acknowledgement that justice, while necessary, couldn't undo what was done. It could only mark the end of one chapter. The civil suit she'd filed seeking damages for medical expenses and emotional trauma was settled out of court. Daniel's family, humiliated by the trial and desperate to avoid further public scrutiny, paid a significant sum that would cover Maya's medical bills and then some. The money couldn't buy her mobility back. Her left leg would always ache in cold weather, and would always require careful management. But it could buy her time to heal, to rebuild, to reimagine her life. Chioma had moved back to London. Their parents had tried to mediate, and had begged Maya to reconsider. But Maya had held firm. She'd written them a letter explaining. I love you both. I understand this situation hurts you, and I'm sorry for that pain. But I cannot maintain a relationship with Chioma for your comfort when doing so would compromise my healing and safety. She helped create a situation that nearly killed me. She participated in psychological torture for months. The fact that she's my sister makes it worse, not better. I need you to respect my boundary on this, even if you don't agree with it. Asterisk. Her parents had struggled, but they'd ultimately chosen to support Maya's decision, visiting her separately from Chioma, never pressuring her to reconsider. Maya's firm had been incredibly supportive. She'd returned to work full-time in April, throwing herself into the riverside development with renewed focus. Work became meditation, the precision of architecture offering structure when her inner world still felt chaotic. But she'd also learned to leave work at work, to build a life beyond professional achievement. She'd started attending a trauma survivor support group, finding unexpected connections with people who understood PTSD, hypervigilance, the way trauma rewires your nervous system. She'd sold the townhouse, too many ghosts, too many associations. The new owner had no idea about its history, and saw only the beautiful renovation, the careful craftsmanship. Maya had used the profit to buy a smaller flat closer to her parents, starting fresh in a space that held no memories of Daniel or Chioma. In therapy, she'd continued exploring the patterns that had made her vulnerable to Daniel's manipulation. The childhood training to prioritize others' needs. The cultural messaging about women's roles. The fear of being alone that had made her settle for crumbs. The belief that love required sacrifice instead of mutual respect. She'd started dating again in August, cautiously, with clear boundaries. The difference was stark. She no longer ignored red flags or made excuses for poor behavior. She walked away from situations that didn't serve her, without guilt or second-guessing. And she'd begun mentoring younger women architects, particularly women of color, sharing not just professional guidance but also hard-won wisdom about self-worth, boundaries, and the importance of choosing yourself when others demand you shrink. 1 year after the incident, Maya stood at the top of a different staircase, the grand entrance of the newly completed riverside development. Her project. Her design. Her vision was realized in steel and glass and carefully considered space. The opening gala was in full swing below. Clients, colleagues, city officials celebrating a successful completion. Maya had given her speech, accepted congratulations, played her role as senior architect with competence and grace. But now, in this quiet moment before rejoining the celebration, she allowed herself to reflect. A year ago, she'd been broken at the bottom of a staircase in her own home, her body shattered, her trust destroyed, her sense of self fractured beyond recognition. Today, she stood whole, not healed perfectly, but healed enough. Her left leg still ached. Stairs still triggered brief moments of panic before her rational mind caught up. She still had nightmares occasionally, still struggled with trust. But she'd survived. More than that, she'd transformed. She'd learned that love shouldn't require you to betray yourself. That family isn't an obligation to accept abuse. Sometimes the most radical act of self-care is walking away from people and situations that harm you, regardless of guilt or expectation. She'd learned that her worth wasn't determined by her relationship status, her ability to keep peace, or others' approval. That being alone was infinitely better than being with someone who diminished her. That she could be complete without being partnered. She'd learned the difference between being strong and performing strength. Real strength wasn't about never breaking, it was about how you rebuilt after shattering. Most importantly, she'd learned that some questions don't have answers. Why did Daniel push her? Why did Chioma betray her? Why did it happen at all? These questions could consume her if she let them. Or she could choose to accept that some people make choices that devastate others, and that understanding their motivations wouldn't undo the damage or prevent future harm. What mattered was what she did with the aftermath. And she'd chosen to build something new from the rubble, a life defined not by what was done to her, but by how she responded to it. Her phone buzzed, a text from Aisha, *, where are you? Everyone's asking for you. Come celebrate yourself, *. Maya smiled. A year ago, the idea of celebrating herself, of centering her own achievement, would have felt uncomfortable, even selfish. Today, it felt right. She descended the stairs carefully, one hand on the railing, taking her time. There was no rush. She was exactly where she needed to be, moving at exactly the pace that served her. At the bottom, Aisha waited with champagne and a knowing smile. You good? Yeah, Maya said, and meant it. I'm good. Maya's story asks us to confront difficult truths about love, betrayal, and the architecture of our own boundaries. How do we know when we're compromising versus sacrificing ourselves? Where's the line between forgiveness and enabling further harm? When is family worth fighting for, and when is walking away the braver choice? These aren't easy questions. Maya's journey shows us that sometimes there are no neat answers, only the choices we make when everything falls apart. If you've experienced betrayal, if you've struggled to leave a situation you knew was harming you, if you've chosen yourself and felt guilty for it, know that you're not alone. Maya's story is fiction, but the emotions, the conflicts, the transformation are achingly real. What would you have done in Maya's position? Would you have confronted Chioma? Testified against Daniel? Cut your sister out of your life? Share your thoughts in the comments. This community is a space for honest conversation about the messy realities of relationships, trauma, and healing. And if Maya's journey resonated with you, subscribe for more stories exploring the complex terrain of human relationships, the power of choosing yourself, and the possibility of rebuilding after devastation. Remember, you don't owe anyone access to your life who's shown you they'll weaponize it. Choosing yourself isn't selfish, it's survival.